I have a question, and for that maybe allow me to first set the scene for you. If you had a southland, a wilderness beyond the mountains, untouched for millennia by human hands and still home to a rich history of mostly tragedy, dead gods and betrayal. And if you add to that a horrific monstrosity pulling the strings behind a recently risen city and a disembodied undead overlord vying to return to a physical shape. If you took all these things and let's say took an area somewhere in the mountains, somewhere near a volcano, and I told you there is a burial chasm there, what would you put in it? Hello friends, Anderson here, welcome back to These Darkened Places, the build, play, setup, prep is play, all those things series for an upcoming SoloDark campaign in the ShadowDark RPG. But of course the setting building is mostly applicable to whatever system you would like to go for. It will remain mostly system agnostic, or at least OSR/BX whatever compatible. So if it for some reason strikes your fancy to cannibalize some of the bits and pieces we are building here, then of course feel free to go ahead and like the video, comment and subscribe. Speaking of comments, there have been a lot of comments and I would like to pick up on them, and I have already collected them and I will go through them, but in the coming video, because today we still have a dungeon to flesh out and illustrate. There will be touching upon some of your feedback, so some of the feedback that I got from you I shall preempt in this video, but the most focus will be in the coming one. So fear not, I have not ignored, forgotten or anything, and I very much appreciate you participating because that makes it a lot more fun and rewarding. Now let's refresh our memories. We are here, we are in this border, mountain range border, at least for this northern kingdom or empire that we have here, and we have a volcanic segment here in these forbidding peaks and the hidden valley where our charismatic leader with legends whispered in the northern lands attracts a following that is slowly but surely becoming a resource problem, and there are simply now too many people coming here for what this area can sustain, despite the fertile volcanic soil. That is one comment I wanted to pick up on. A comment left by Shrimp is delicious, and this is an observation and a suggestion that volcanic soil, while being incredibly fertile, also has its limits, and that maybe a recent influx, maybe pushed by a new wave of persecutions in the north, that's my own addition to this, is now overloading the produce capacity of this area, and that makes for a nice little powder keg as well of the maybe established hideaways in this remote location now being somewhat less welcoming to the newcomers because they don't have any resources to share anymore. Now, I would like to approach the dungeon building by following a little bit of a simplification. I do not want to only do it in bullet points and in writing, but I also don't want to go map out floor by floor. I want to get an idea what's there. I want to get an idea of who is there and what the different levels and populations in those levels that we can expect are. So I want to use the pattern from the monster Overhaul, where there is a nice little, or maybe even not so little, generic mega dungeon. So this is roughly the visualization that I had in mind for this. Perhaps not as intricate with as many different blobs, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a mega dungeon, but I think it's more like a sequence of dungeons, and it has something to do with the surrounding mountains here. So I guess if we take a peek in our volcanic surrounded valley here, which we basically take over the backs of the surrounding mountains and towards this towering skyline surrounding it. That is our basic layout. And somewhere here is our burial chasm. And this leads me to another comment, one left by Paul Ramos, and that is that the burial chasm, in a literal sense, is where the locals dispatch of bodies. So there is this chasm, and the locals have some kind of ceremony and ritual where they throw the bodies in. I like it, but it also kind of made something pop in my head, and from there on I almost treated it like a prompt, and it kind of snowballed into something different, which already gives me like a first idea for one dungeon level. And also I would like to integrate this whole throwing bodies in the pit, but I think the locals we're talking about here aren't our locals that reside in the valley. They are some surrounding roaming mountain humanoids. I haven't really gotten the best idea to specify who they are yet, but this whole refocusing on the burial aspect of all of this gave me an idea that maybe I don't just want to take it as a one-off where I'm assuming that some ancient evil of a prior darkening was buried here. I also want to fork out a little and use this as a way to flesh out our valley itself, our village here, because I'm wondering, in this area of flat land blasted by ash, constantly in a haze of smoke from the surrounding open clefts in the mountainside that exude this ash constantly, this smoke, but also these open calderas, even if they're not fully active, constantly just exuding smoke. Would there even be trees? Would there be building materials? Would they be able to secure it? Or would they be wanting to make use of the structures that they found when they first got here? And that got me to think of eons ago, some ancient evil was thrown into the chasm, and what happens then? Maybe some people stay behind, and that lets us establish maybe our first real element here. So we have a carve in this cliff face and seemingly inaccessible from the bottom. So there is no path anymore that works. There's only maybe the hint of one that used to be there, but it is very dangerous now to ascend, and the people here haven't dared to do it yet. But there is this ruin here that they can, on clear days, occasionally see. And that is a ruin that was left behind millennia ago by the Watchers that stayed behind here to keep an eye on the chasm, which is presumably somewhere in this mountain as well. And I think what we have down here in the valley, besides their food source, is also their barrows. And that is what now makes up the majority of the houses, the shelters of our village here, of our settlement here. So the first people that came here to settle found these barrows, and they found their entrances, their stone entrances, and when the first ash storm picked up and blew hell through this valley, they had no choice but to open the entrances and take shelter in there. And it started from there that they ended up eventually clearing out the top layers of them, and maybe even a little bit further in, and then took up residence there. Now, I assume, if I make a little bit of a sketch underneath here, I assume all these barrows are also somehow connected by an underground structure, and that there is maybe some other ritual chamber really far down, because why not? That gives us another layer to explore. But this is a place that the locals here so far have not dared to go into. They've walled it off in each of the barrows that they've turned into residences, and it's effectively forbidden to dig deeper, because we all know what happens if you dig too deep. So basically that whole idea of throwing corpses into the chasm made me think of a graveyard of the barrows. Of that would be cool if they lived there. And also there should be a temple or a watch post of some sort here, and that is what the settlement is comprised of, is these barrows. And they have this incentive up there that maybe one day their curiosity wins and they dare to brave the mountainside and go there. And there is a structure under the barrows that the locals don't open. Now it's abstractified a little bit, so we have our volcano, our main volcano outline here, and then we have the 1 is our temple level. I'm thinking of it as a temple for some reason, like a sort of a monastery. I'm not sure what kind of people were there, whether it was mixed, whether it was maintained by the northern realm there, or who did what and how long ago. That is something we'll have to figure out eventually. And I think there is access now only from the outside, from up the mountain, because there is a part of the deeper interior that is collapsed, and there is a remnant here. We'll call this 2 the cut-off reliquary, or maybe a library or something of the sort, and that has a connection further down into the mountain. And I want to have it this way because I think otherwise it would be a bit too easy to find a lot of information about why this place is here and what the chasm is about. So we'll have it that in a seismic event in the past, after the last of the monks died out or whatever happened to them, because there's also this thing at play that if there was a pressing issue here with this burial chasm, maybe the tension was upheld for the first century or two, and then it turns into legend, and then it turns into myth, and sooner or later nobody even really believes that there was a big bad that got thrown in the chasm. That's kind of the idea here why this is abandoned now. But still, they will have records, and the records are in the second part here. So if we ever want to make it to those records, we have to come from underground. We can't come through here because there's just no way to get to this part anymore. Well, there would be, but you'd probably need like a regiment of dwarves and power tools or whatever you want to bring to bear. And then down here we have Barrowville that we need a name for, and then we have number 3, which is our underground substructure. And that is all something we need to eventually fill with purpose and with content and sort of an idea of what can be found and encountered here. Now, where is our chasm? That's another question. And I think the chasm is probably somehow tied to this volcano that's kind of poking out here and is kind of the dominant one. We're gonna assume if we have our ground level here that the chasm is like really far down and maybe even spanning like all the way under some of the other mountains. But this is perspective-wise a little bit difficult to display. I messed it up a bit, so I redid it a bit more simplified. What I was trying to insinuate with this reaching it all the way through here is that it also ranges under this whole area, that this chasm is vast, but maybe this area underneath the monastery is the interesting bit where they threw in their former evil overlord. And some of the outliers will be accessible from some of these openings in the tops of the mountains and just go all the way down into the pit, and that's where our surrounding humanoids that have this burial ritual of throwing their dead into the chasm to their perhaps former deity. Perhaps there's still some worship left across all these millennia by some tribals or whatever else we have in this area, and that's how we link all of this up. Now, I think one thing we need to come back to before we do anything else is the question that I asked at the top of the episode, which is, if you had a chasm like that in an area like this, who would you throw in? And I want to put that in light of our Runkel and our Southfall ShadowDark agent overlord characters, the Scoutworm and the Elflich. Considering everything that has happened here, and considering what we now find here, I feel like whatever the equivalent to those 2 buried there is in power that scales to making this kind of thing necessary is probably a league or 2 above. So either a Sauron level or a Morgoth level kind of creature that finds their dead, eternal, lying stranger, eon's death may dying body down in the chasm. And I'm leaning towards a Morgoth. So really going into the very, very distant past of this continent. And we just imagine this alliance of the Runkel elves and their brethren across the mountains, and maybe their dragon there and their deity, everyone going to war against this catalyst of the very first darkening. I think that is what would make for like a really good association with this volcano and with this guardianship up here, and it just feels right. So Deep down the first catalyst of a darkening lies something evil and godlike. And before I make the mistake and keep thinking of this as Morgoth from Wish, I think I'm just gonna give them a name from the Ultimate Toolbox, and let's see if we catch the right vibe in one of these. I think I still line up mostly with these Gods 1 and 2 tables, so we're gonna do the die 6 and die 20 again. 1 to 3 is this table, 4 to 6 is this table here. 1 and 16, that is Koroth, Lord of Ambition. Well, the dice are once more on our side. That even almost sounds a little bit like Morgoth. And I think before we can really decide what Koroth is, we need to determine the cosmology of this world. What is Shiga? What is this old pantheon? Is Koroth one of them? Is this something even older? Is it related to the ShadowDark? What is the matter with the new gods? How do they fit into all of this? And I'd like to go into this a bit more in the coming videos, because there's also a comment or two regarding the nature of Shiga that sparked my ruminations on the nature of deities in this world, and I think I have an idea or two, but this doesn't really fit into the dungeon making. So for now, all we need to know is that there is Koroth, the Lord of Ambition, if we want to keep that title, locked down there for their ambition. And that, for the moment, is that. Do we also want to have a name for our barrow town? Thinking this will be pretty tricky to roll up, but maybe we get lucky with Realm Fables. Let's see. Can't recommend this one enough. Can we do something with the town names without rolling? Maybe... I'm thinking that calling it something a little bit tongue-in-cheek or sarcastic, potentially a bit derogatory, something like Mud Slopes or Ash Mound, or... You know what? These are all workable, but it's not really a pressing concern. We just need a name, so why don't you pitch in for this one? If you have an idea what a gaggle of barrows would be called by a bunch of hardened refugees who decide that they are their new houses now, let me know in the comments. Oh, I also want to make a note, of course, of our mountain tribes, those of the chasm burials. So we have a burial chasm and the chasm burials, milking the prompt until it gives up. Sneaking a glance at the Tome of Agentur design here, because I would like some inspiration for another dungeon area. Because once we have the area and general purpose established, we can populate it a little bit better with creatures and leave it sort of at that level until we start playing and maybe start exploring it, and then it becomes more of a room-by-room thing. And I think I'm gonna go one more time with the purpose-based approach, and then maybe mix it up a little bit and start from another point. But we're gonna do a two-word combination here again and see where it fits into our pattern. Red one goes first. 30 is entry. And 58 is ovens. Entry ovens. I was initially thinking entry was somewhere close to the surface, but now I'm thinking it's really close to the chasm, because if we take the entry ovens idea, then what I'm thinking of is that is the hot place that you have to make it through to get to the burial place of Koroth. So perhaps there's like a cavern here that opens up, and the deep chasm part where Koroth was lowered into the final resting place is accessible through a gauntlet, kind of a fiery hell pit of lava and fire elementals, and perhaps some kind of controlling entity that makes sure that nobody makes it through, actually. Sort of our, almost like our final boss before you can get to Koroth, which unsurprisingly means it's like a fire-based, powerful guardian entity. I don't think that is much of a stretch, considering we had this volcanic slant to begin with, so there were always going to be some kind of a fire elemental, fire-themed dungeon, and I think putting it right above the chasm is fitting. Maybe not even really literally above, maybe it's like a little behind and you have to make it through to get to the chasm. That's something we can always figure out. This whole layout is really abstract and more to keep the general relationship straight. It's not everything is underneath everything else. It's going to be like, you know, slightly shifted in relation to one another. And so I'm calling it the fiery hellscape before the chasm can be reached, and putting the last line of defense in brackets. I'm saying last line in case somebody comes from the outside to free Koroth. If Koroth comes out of the chasm, then it's naturally the first line of defense, but I think they weren't expecting that. They were expecting death to be, if at all, undoable, then only with outside help. And they were forestalling and building towards keeping out instead of keeping in. So they, whoever they are, rely on the chasm to be the prison and doing that job, and they rely on everything else to be geared towards keeping potential Korothian acolytes out. I was kind of scrounging around for more material to approach the dungeon from, and I think we're gonna go with Realm Fables World Generator Volume 1, because it has a section here as well. And I think we're gonna pick a dungeon theme from this table here and roll a die 20 and see what we can place next. 20, that's probably a good one. Carvings of an unknown language cover the floors and voices whisper to you from nowhere. That's interesting. By the way, I didn't really look at too many of the options here. There's also an option that says pirates wait to ambush adventurers within, so that would have been a bit of a challenging one. Carvings of an unknown language kind of fits to some forgotten evil alphabet, and this is where madness lies, is interesting. I wonder if we can wedge that somewhere here on this as yet unspecified shaft that is somehow connected to the temple up above, because I think you probably need to make your way like through some other level here still. Figure that out later. And initially this was connected to the temple, and I'm noting them down as the Halls of Mad Whispers, and I'm putting them down as writings in an unknown alphabet. Now, how did this come to pass? I think the entrance to the monastery connector is probably hidden. And the madness, the whispers, and the unknown alphabet all make me think that this is kind of a place of a schism between the watchers here, where maybe some of them... This whole drift down makes me think there was some arrangement where some always went all the way down to keep watch, while some stayed above, and they would interchange and they would relieve each other so they could sustain this task. But perhaps as the years went on, as they were fewer and fewer of them, they stayed down there longer and longer than was healthy, and being exposed to these maddening whisperings, maybe dreams triggered by Koroth's dead but active defiling nature nearby. Some of them just went mad and created this place here where they formed their own little cult and started scribbling on the walls, and maybe there's like all kinds of ghosts and things like that there. And I put the number 7 here because I think there should be some kind of a different entryway somewhere further down the mountain, maybe some kind of mine or some other more natural cave system. We can think about that, and I think that is still one step removed from here. So whatever 7 is sort of in between the place where madness lies and the place where you can get into the mountain. I'm constructing it this way because I don't want there to be an easy beeline into part 2, which to my mind just holds a fair amount of knowledge about Koroth and about the activities here, and that for our party at least should remain a milestone to figure that out, and should remain a mystery for quite some time. Should we just get another one from Realm Fables and see what we get? Because I think there were still a few interesting ones, and I'm kind of playing a bit of pirate Russian roulette here and hoping I'm not rolling a 14. Let's see. 3 riddled with black portals that lead to a demonic plane. Okay, so that is probably 7 then. And noting it down as demonic portal and planar access. And this is something that they created later, but then I think I want to keep it cut off. I don't want there to be like a mine tunnel digging into there. I guess we need a separate kind of access here. I want to place another one. I want to see kind of what else I can work with here, and then maybe we can tie a few of those elements together. That's a 6. What is a 6? Guarded by undead dwarven sentinels? I mean, it's a step up from pirates, at least dwarves and mountains. Undead dwarven sentinels. Okay, let's think about this. We have a lot of rock work done here. There's a lot of, especially this shaft again. If that's not dwarven make, then I don't know what is. And perhaps the original builders remained here, and they take their job very, very seriously, even all the way beyond the grave. So I'm calling it the dwarf builder tombs, and I put them really far down here. And that makes me think that initially, when the Koroth Darkening was defeated, all kinds of allied peoples came here, and they constructed this whole prison and sentinel arrangement here, and the dwarves created this whole area. That's what they built. And when they were done, they left some of their number behind to do maintenance and to also be interred here. And through their connection to the stone, through their connection to the place here, they are here still on duty, still sentinels, and the only ones that they would let through have some kind of recognizable connection to the Watchers, to the monastery. And if you don't have that and you show up all the way down there, they're going to kick your ass. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's also already quite a lot. And the video is running a bit long, so I'm going to leave it here. And I'm going to leave you with a couple of questions. Do you think we need to put more stuff down here? Or is this enough to start connecting the dots? And what do you think Koroth could be? And then maybe we can decide a bit more about gods and worship and old pantheon, new pantheon in the next episode, alongside a lot of other points. And until then, I thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you next time, and bye for now.